If I wanted to, I could probably fill an entire YouTube channel just talking about all of the stupid things that the State Department is irresponsible for. And I could call it the idiots of Foggy Bottom. These problems aren't unique to the Bush administration, but to give some of the lowlights. The Plame affair was caused by the State Department. The problem that we're having in Venezuela was exacerbated by the State Department's refusal to support the coup against Chavez. Don't even get me started about the debacle that the State Department has wreaked in Iraq. Wait a minute, because they really deserve to be reamed for this one. If you want to talk about real scandals, what about how the State Department, by sucking so much media cock, doesn't get reported on all of their failure?
Today in the Washington Post, Robert Novak had a column, No Good at Nation Building, in which he touched gently on this issue. Of course, Novak is no stranger to getting hummers from the State Department. He talks about a delegation of Iraqi attorneys who had come to the White House to deliver a letter to President Bush talking about the breakdown of the rule of law in Iraq and the need to support the functioning of the independent judiciary and court system. The letter in part talks about the State Department, and Novak quotes about their failure to grant final approval to the codification of Iraqi law. That might be a little important to deal with criminals. Also, very gently, Novak excuses the State Department for their failures in this area, where he says that, they're just not really set up to do the job that they're responsible for, and so I guess it must not be their fault.
In a column about the breakdown of law in Iraq, that's the most that Novak has to say about the irresponsibility of the State Department. If you go back to the spring, when Army Chief of Staff Casey was going through his confirmation hearings, senators were going after case after case after case of saying, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And in all of those cases, the response was, states responsible for it and they haven't done their job. States responsible for it and they haven't done their job. And these were especially related to the issue of the administration of justice. A couple of years ago, I remember reading probably the same group of Iraqi attorneys talking about how the bar and the bench, the whole judicial system, had been totally destroyed by the State Department in their de-Ba'athification policy. And it was replaced with no functioning system. Imagine that. It's as if they're assuming just because the Americans are there and there's an occupation, there are no criminals that we have to deal with. There's no administration of justice that has to go on. Why is this important? It's because in criticizing the job that the Department of Defense has done in the occupation and ignoring the State Department's responsibility for those failures, the proposed solution to replace the current policy has been to give more responsibility to the State Department. And this isn't a Bush administration issue. This is a misfunctioning State Department that has been like this for administration after administration.
Now, partisans have been harping on everything as Bush's fault. However, what they need to be concerned about is that there's going to be an election soon, and we will soon have a new president. And that new president will, like President Bush, inherit a failed, dysfunctional State Department. In the couple of minutes that are left in this video, there's no way I can catalog every single failure that the State Department has committed in Iraq. So I'm going to talk about two broad issues and get a little specific on them to illustrate my overall point. two things are at issue. First, the State Department is ineffective when it comes to representing American interests abroad. Second, and this may be the cause of the first, the State Department seems to have lost any idea of the principles of American government. As an example of the first point, even Ambassador Bremer confessed and recognized that in large part the Iraqi insurgency was due to the failure of the State Department. Specifically, Iraqi brigades north of Baghdad during the armed conflict were not engaged. The reason that these units were not engaged was because that they were to have been challenged by the 4th Infantry Division, which of course was the group that was supposed to be going through Turkey. However, in a parliamentary move, the Turkish government was able to both show majority support for allowing U.S. troops to use their soil to stage the invasion of Iraq, and at the same time block that same event from occurring. Now, the State Department should have made clear to the Turks the consequences of failing to fulfill their role as an American ally. And there should have in fact been consequences for that failure. It's as if we had another April Gillespie moment. According to Ambassador Bremer, those troops, Iraqi troops that were not engaged by U.S. troops that could not stage in Turkey, those formed the backbone of insurgency in the Sunni Triangle. So that every death related to that insurgency can be attributed to the failure of the State Department to perform their job. On the second issue of the State Department losing its way, losing its understanding of American government, I point to the Constitution, a parliamentary-style Constitution that has been established in Iraq and has been the core of the Iraqis' failure to be able to form an effective government. In contrast to our current State Department, several hundred years ago, one of our ambassadors, John Adams, championed American-style government overseas. He railed against the ideas of the French philosophes that led, subsequent to his warnings, to the bloody terror following the French Revolution. And just as those ideas led to those circumstances predicted by Adams in France, when the State Department imposed similar constitutional government upon Iraq, the same bloody terror followed. In summary, the State Department has badly failed the American people in Iraq, as it has done elsewhere in the world. This is not simply a function of the Bush administration. The next president will inherit this problem, and it will be necessary to confront these fundamental issues and not just chalk it up to some organizational lapse if we are going to be able to defend America's interest in the future and in the war on terror. Because when our military leaders say that Iraq requires more than a military solution, what they're really saying, and I'll translate for you now, is that other government agencies, and especially the State Department, need to get off their ass and pull their weight and do their job.